The August sun was brutal in Atlanta that afternoon. Heat rose from the pavement in waves. The kind of heat that made people stay inside with their air conditioning on full blast. But Solomon Kane Wright sat on the hard concrete, his back pressed against the stone wall outside the Montgomery estate in Buckhead. He looked nothing like a billionaire. His clothes were torn and dirty. An old hoodie with holes at the elbows. Jeans that hadn't been washed in days. Dust covered his dark skin. His beard was growing out rough and unkempt. Beside him sat a paper cup with a few coins inside. Props, all of it. Solomon had been sitting here for 3 days now, watching, waiting, observing how the rich folks in this neighborhood treated people like him, or rather people they thought were like him. Most of them walked right past without a glance. Some crossed the street to avoid him. One woman had actually called security on him yesterday, but the guards just told him to move further from the gate. He moved about 10 feet, then sat right back down. Solomon had done this before. Twice a year for the past 5 years, he would disappear from his penthouse, put on torn clothes, and live among the invisible people of Atlanta. His therapist had suggested it years ago. "You grew up with nothing," Dr. Patterson had said. "Now you have everything, but you've lost connection with humanity. Find it again." So he did. And every single time he was reminded why he trusted no one. People were cruel. People were selfish. People only cared about what you could give them. But today would be different. Solomon just didn't know it yet. The iron gates of the Montgomery estate creaked open around 4 in the afternoon. Solomon looked up from his position on the ground. He expected to see a fancy car pulling out. Maybe a Mercedes or a Bentley. The Montgomery family was old Atlanta money. They had 3 cars that he'd counted so far, but it wasn't a car. It was a girl. She came out carrying 2 large trash bags, one in each hand. She walked toward the garbage bins near the side of the gate. Solomon studied her carefully. That's what he did. He watched people. She was young, maybe early 20s, medium height, warm mahogany skin. Her natural hair was pulled back in a simple bun, like she didn't have time to do anything fancy with it. She wore a plain gray dress, the kind that maids wore. No jewelry. No makeup, sensible flat shoes that had seen better days. But it was her eyes that caught his attention. Even from a distance, Solomon could see that those eyes carried weight, sadness, exhaustion, the kind of tiredness that sleep couldn't fix. He knew that look. He'd seen it in the mirror for years when he was younger. The girl tossed the trash bags into the bin. Then she turned to walk back inside. That's when their eyes met. Solomon held her gaze. He didn't look away, didn't beg, didn't rattle his cup. He just looked at her. Something flickered across her face. Recognition. Not of who he was, of course. Nobody recognized Solomon Wright when he looked like this, no. It was a different kind of recognition, like she was seeing herself in him. The girl hesitated for a moment. Then she turned and walked back through the gate. It closed behind her with a heavy clang. Solomon let out a small breath, just like everyone else. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't even disappointed anymore. But then something unexpected happened. The gate opened again. The same girl stepped out. But this time she wasn't carrying trash. She was carrying a plate of food. Solomon's eyebrows lifted slightly. He watched as she walked toward him, her steps careful but determined. When she reached him, she knelt down so they were at eye level. Up close, he could see more details. The dark circles under her eyes. The way her cheekbones were a little too sharp, like she wasn't eating enough. A small birthmark near her left eye. And those eyes. Lord, those eyes. Brown and deep and filled with a kindness that seemed almost painful. "Here," she said softly. She held out the plate. "It's still warm." Solomon looked at the food, rice and beans, a small piece of chicken, some vegetables on the side. A simple meal, but it was prepared with care. He looked back at her. "This is yours." It wasn't a question. He could tell from the single plate, the portion size. This wasn't leftovers from the big house. This was her meal. The girl shrugged like it was nothing. "I already ate," she said. She was lying. Solomon could tell. He'd built a billion-dollar company by reading people. This girl hadn't eaten anything today. Maybe not yesterday either from the look of her, but she was giving him her food anyway. "What's your name?" Solomon asked. His voice came out rougher than usual. He'd been practicing that, making his voice sound worn down, like life had beaten it out of him. The girl stood up. "Zora," she said. "Zora Carter." Then she turned and walked back through the gate without another word. Solomon watched her go until the iron bars blocked his view. He looked down at the plate in his hands. Steam still rose from the rice. For the first time in 5 years of doing this, someone had given him something real. Not leftover scraps, not expired food from a pantry cleanout, their own meal, while they went hungry. Solomon pulled out his phone from inside his hoodie. It was the latest iPhone hidden in a secret pocket, worth more than everything he appeared to own combined. He dialed a number. "Derek," he said when the line connected. "I need you to find out everything about a woman named Zora Carter. She works for a family called Montgomery, Buckhead Estate. Solo, it's like 95 degrees out there. Please tell me you're not sitting on a sidewalk again. Just do it, Derek." A sigh came through the phone. "Fine." "What am I looking for?" Solomon looked at the plate of food again. Then at the gate where Zora had disappeared. "Everything," he said. "I want to know her whole story. Something's not right here, I can feel it." He ended the call. Then Solomon Kane Wright, billionaire, founder of Wright Development Corporation, owner of half of Atlanta's new construction projects, did something he hadn't done in years. He ate every single bite of that meal, and it was the best thing he'd tasted in a long, long time. Now you might be wondering, who is Zora Carter? How did a young woman end up working as a maid in a mansion, so broke she couldn't even afford to keep her own food? Let me take you back. 2 years back to the night that changed everything. It was raining the night James and Lorraine Carter died. Not just raining, pouring. The kind of Atlanta thunderstorm that turned highways into rivers and made smart people pull over and wait. But James Carter wasn't pulling over. He was driving fast, trying to get his wife home from their anniversary dinner. 30 years of marriage. They'd celebrated at their favorite restaurant in Midtown, the same place James had proposed all those years ago. Zora was at home in their West End brownstone. She was 21 years old, a junior at Spelman College, studying architecture. She wanted to design buildings like her father built them. James Carter owned Carter and Sons Construction. It was a mid-sized company, but it was good. Honest work, fair wages. James had built that company from nothing, brick by brick, just like the buildings he constructed. The company name always made Zora laugh. Carter and Sons. James didn't have any sons, just Zora, but he'd named it that way for the legacy. "One day you'll run this company, baby girl," he'd always told her. "You'll carry the Carter name forward." Zora had believed him. That night she was studying for an exam when her phone rang. The caller ID said Grady Memorial Hospital. She answered, and her entire world collapsed. The doctors said it was instant. A truck had lost control on the wet highway. It slammed into her parents' car at full speed. James and Lorraine Carter didn't suffer, but Zora. Zora would suffer for years to come. If you're feeling Zora's pain right now, you're not alone. This story is about to take you on a journey you won't forget. Make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what happens next. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this ends. The funeral was beautiful. Half of Atlanta showed up to pay respects. James Carter had been a good man. Everybody knew it. Everybody loved him. Gerald Montgomery stood at the front of the church, tears streaming down his face. He and James had been best friends since their Morehouse College days. Roommates. Brothers in everything but blood. "Take care of your daughter, James," Gerald had whispered at the casket. "I promise." Zora had heard him. She'd felt hope in that moment. Uncle Gerald, that's what she'd always called him, would help her figure things out. She had no idea how wrong she was. 2 weeks after the funeral, Zora sat in a lawyer's office in downtown Atlanta. The lawyer's name was Mr. Henderson. He was an older man with gray hair and kind eyes, but the words coming out of his mouth were anything but kind. "I'm sorry, Miss Carter," Mr. Henderson said, "but your father had significant debts." Zora blinked. "Debts? That's impossible. Daddy's company was doing well. He just bought Mama a new car for their anniversary." Mr. Henderson sighed. He slid a folder across the desk. 2 years ago, your father's company went through a rough patch. Several contracts fell through. He borrowed money to keep things afloat." Opened the folder. Her hands were shaking. The number at the bottom of the page made her stomach drop. $2.7 million. "This can't be right," Zora whispered. "Daddy would have told me. He tells me everything." "Used your family home as collateral," Mr. Henderson continued gently, "along with several other properties. I'm afraid if these debts aren't settled, you'll lose everything." Zora stared at the papers. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. Her father was gone. Her mother was gone. And now she was about to lose everything they'd built. She was 21 years old, still in college. She didn't know how to run a company. She didn't have $2.7 million. She didn't have anything. That's when Vivian Ashford Montgomery stepped in. Gerald had brought his wife to meet Zora 3 days after the lawyer meeting. They sat in Zora's living room, the same living room where Zora had taken her first steps, opened Christmas presents, watched movies with her parents on lazy Sundays. Gerald looked uncomfortable. He kept fidgeting with his tie, avoiding Zora's eyes, but Vivian looked perfectly at ease. She was a tall woman, elegant in that old money way, pearls around her neck, designer dress, not a single hair out of place. She smiled at Zora, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. It never did. Poor thing, Vivian said, her voice dripping with sweetness that somehow felt sour. Gerald told me about your father's debts, such a tragedy. James was always so proud. He never wanted anyone to know he was struggling. Zora didn't respond. Something about Vivian's tone made her skin crawl. We want to help, Vivian continued. She placed a manicured hand over her heart. Gerald and your father were like brothers. We can't just let you drown in debt. We'll pay it off. Zora's eyes widened. You will, hope bloomed in her chest for the first time in weeks. But then Vivian's smile sharpened. Of course, nothing in life is free, dear. You understand that, don't you? The hope began to wilt. Gerald cleared his throat. Vivian, maybe we should. Hush, Gerald. Vivian didn't even look at her husband. Her eyes stayed locked on Zora. Here's what I'm proposing. We pay off your father's debts in full, every single penny, and in return you come work for us. Work for you? Zora repeated. As household help. You'll have room and board included. No living expenses. Every dollar we would have paid a regular employee will go toward your debt instead. In 3 years you'll be completely free. Debt cleared. Fresh start. Zora's mind was spinning. 3 years of work to clear $2.7 million. That's very generous, she said slowly. Something felt wrong, but she couldn't put her finger on it. It's what family does, Vivian said sweetly. Your father helped Gerald get his start in business years ago. Consider this us returning the favor. Gerald nodded, but he still wouldn't meet Zora's eyes. I need to think about it, Zora said. Vivian's smile tightened for just a second. Of course, dear, take all the time you need, but the creditors are calling, aren't they? The bank is asking about the house. Time is a luxury you don't have. She stood up, smoothing her dress. Let us know by Friday. After that, I'm afraid the offer expires. Zora talked to Carmen that night. Carmen Delgado had been Zora's roommate at Spelman before everything fell apart. They'd become sisters in that way that only college friends can. Carmen was fiery, protective, and always spoke her mind. Girl, I don't like it, Carmen said through the phone. Something about that woman gives me bad vibes. Did you see her eyes, cold as ice? What choice do I have, Carmen? Zora's voice cracked. I'm about to be homeless. I had to drop out of school. The company is falling apart because I don't know how to run it. At least this way I can pay off Daddy's debt. 3 years, though, as a maid, for people with that much money, Zora, that's basically slavery with extra steps. It's not slavery. I'll have a place to stay, food to eat, and at the end I'll be free. Carmen was quiet for a long moment. I don't trust them, she finally said. But I trust you. Whatever you decide, I've got your back, always. I know, Zora whispered. I love you, Carmen. You too, Hermana. Call me if you need anything. I mean it. Anything. Zora accepted the offer on Friday. She moved into the Montgomery estate that Sunday. And that's when she discovered what Vivian Ashford Montgomery was really like. The room they gave Zora wasn't really a room. It was a space in the basement. Concrete floors. A small cot pushed against the wall. A single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. This is temporary, of course, Vivian had said with that cold smile. Until we can prepare a proper space for you. 2 years later, Zora was still in that basement. The work started at 5 in the morning. Zora would wake up before the sun, climb the basement stairs, and begin cleaning, mopping floors, scrubbing bathrooms, doing laundry, washing dishes, cooking meals that she wasn't allowed to eat. She worked until midnight. Sometimes later, her payment, 1 meal a day. Usually whatever scraps were left over. And sometimes, when Vivian was feeling particularly generous, she'd give Zora an actual plate of food, that plate of food. That was what Zora had given to Solomon, her only meal for the day. Now I know what you're thinking. Why didn't Zora just leave? Why didn't she call the police? Why didn't she fight back? Here's the truth about traps, y'all. The best ones don't look like traps at all. Zora had signed a contract. A legal document that said she agreed to work for the Montgomerys until her debt was paid. If she left before then, she'd owe the full amount immediately, plus interest, plus legal fees. She'd be worse off than before, and Vivian made sure to remind her of that every single day. "Lucky we took you in," Vivian would say. "Without us, you'd be on the streets, homeless, just like those beggars outside the gate." Those words echoed in Zora's mind as she walked back into the mansion after giving her food to Solomon. She hadn't planned to do it. She'd just seen him sitting there, looking broken and hungry, and something in her chest had cracked open. She knew what it felt like to be invisible, to be treated like nothing, to have people look right through you. She couldn't fix her own situation, but maybe she could make his day a little better, even if it meant going hungry herself. That night Zora lay on her cot in the basement. Her stomach growled loudly. She pressed her hand against it, willing it to be quiet. On the small table beside her cot sat a photograph in a cracked frame. Her parents, smiling at the camera, arms wrapped around a younger Zora. "I miss you," she whispered to the photo. "I miss you so much." A tear slid down her cheek. Outside the basement window, small, near the ceiling, Zora could see the moon. The same moon her mother used to point out when Zora was little. "The moon sees everyone, baby girl," her mother would say. "It doesn't care if you're rich or poor. It shines for all of us the same." Zora closed her eyes. Tomorrow would be another day, another 18 hours of work, another round of Vivian's cold comments and Tiffany's cruel jokes. But tonight she'd done something good. She'd fed someone who needed it more than her, and somehow that made the hunger a little easier to bear. Meanwhile, across town in a penthouse that overlooked Piedmont Park, Solomon Wright stood by his floor-to-ceiling windows. He was freshly showered now. The dirt and grime washed away. Designer clothes replaced the torn hoodie and old jeans, but his mind was still on that girl. Zora Carter. His phone buzzed. A text from Derek. "Got some initial info. You're gonna want to see this." Her father was James Carter. Carter and Sons Construction, died 2 years ago, left behind massive debt. Daughter now works for the Montgomery family to pay it off. "Something smells wrong though, still digging." Solomon typed back, "Keep digging, I want everything, financial records, contracts, all of it." "You got it, boss, but solo. Why do you care so much? She's just a random girl." Solomon stared at the text. Why did he care? He'd met thousands of people during his homeless experiments. Most of them ignored him. A few threw coins. One or two offered food, but nobody had ever given him their only meal while they were clearly starving themselves. There was something different about Zora Carter, and Solomon was going to find out what it was. He typed one final message to Derek. "She gave me her last meal today. She had nothing and she gave it to me anyway." Someone like that doesn't deserve to be suffering. Find out who's responsible. He put down the phone. Outside, the Atlanta skyline glittered like 1,000 diamonds. Solomon owned buildings in that skyline. His company had developed half of it. He had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. And yet, a girl with nothing had just taught him something about generosity that all his billions never could. Solomon made a decision right then. Whatever was happening to Zora Carter in that house, whatever trap she was caught in, he was going to get her out of it, and whoever had put her there, they were going to regret it. But Solomon had no idea what he was about to uncover. The Montgomery family had secrets, dark secrets, secrets that would make his blood boil. And Zora had no idea that the homeless man she'd fed was about to turn her entire world upside down. Y'all, this story is just getting started. If you want to see what happens when Solomon discovers the truth about Zora's debt, and trust me, it's going to make you angry. Drop a comment below and tell me what you think Vivian is hiding. I read every single comment. The next morning, Zora woke up at 4:45. 15 minutes before her alarm, her stomach was eating itself. That's what it felt like anyway. She hadn't eaten anything since yesterday's breakfast. A small bowl of oatmeal that Vivian had complained was too much food for the help. Given her lunch to the homeless man. Dinner had been skipped because Tiffany had decided to throw a last-minute party, and Zora had been cleaning until 2 in the morning. Now she was running on empty. Literally. Zora sat up on her cot and pressed a hand to her stomach. The growling was so loud she was sure the whole house could hear it, but she didn't regret giving away her food. That man had looked so broken, so defeated. Like life had chewed him up and spit him out. She knew that feeling. She lived it every single day. At least she had a roof over her head. At least she had something. That man had nothing but a paper cup and torn clothes. Zora pushed herself off the cot and began getting ready for another day. Upstairs, the Montgomery household was already stirring. Vivian Ashford Montgomery sat at the head of the breakfast table, scrolling through her phone. Her plate was piled high with eggs, bacon, fresh fruit, and toast. A glass of fresh squeezed orange juice sat beside her. Gerald sat at the other end, hiding behind a newspaper. He barely touched his food. These days, Gerald barely did anything except avoid his wife's gaze. And Tiffany. Tiffany was still in bed. She never woke up before noon unless there was a shopping trip or a party involved. The kitchen door swung open and Zora walked in carrying a fresh pot of coffee. She moved silently, the way she'd learned to move over the past 2 years. Don't make noise, don't draw attention, just do the work and stay invisible. Late, Vivian said without looking up from her phone. Zora glanced at the clock on the wall. It was exactly 5 o'clock. She wasn't late. She was right on time. But she didn't argue. She'd learned not to argue. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Zora said quietly. "It won't happen again." "That it doesn't." Vivian finally looked up. Her eyes traveled over Zora slowly like she was examining livestock. "You look terrible. Are you sick?" "No, ma'am, I'm fine." "Good, I don't pay for sick days." Vivian returned to her phone. "The bathrooms need extra attention today. I'm having guests tomorrow evening. Everything needs to be perfect." "Yes, ma'am." "Make sure Tiffany's room is spotless." She mentioned something about clothes on the floor. Zora's jaw tightened slightly. Tiffany's room was always a disaster. That girl threw clothes around like confetti and expected Zora to pick up every piece. But again, she didn't argue. "Yes, ma'am." Vivian waved her hand dismissively. "Go." Zora turned and walked out of the dining room. Gerald watched her go. His newspaper lowered slightly, and something that looked like guilt flickered across his face. But he didn't say a word. He never did. By noon, Zora had cleaned 4 bathrooms, mopped the entire first floor, done 3 loads of laundry, and organized the pantry. Her body was screaming for food. Her hands were shaking slightly. Her vision kept going blurry around the edges, but it was time for her 30-minute break. The only 30 minutes of freedom she got all day. Zora walked toward the back door of the kitchen. She grabbed a plate from the counter, her lunch, prepared earlier that morning. Rice, beans, and a small piece of chicken. The same meal as yesterday. She was so hungry she could have eaten the plate itself. But as she walked toward the gate, her feet slowed. The homeless man was there again, same spot as yesterday, back against the stone wall. Paper cup beside him, torn clothes, rough beard. Eyes that seemed to see right through everything. Zora's stomach growled painfully. She looked down at her plate, then back at the man. He was watching her. Not begging, not rattling his cup. Just watching with those intense dark eyes. Zora made a decision. She walked over and sat down on the ground beside him, right there on the concrete. In her plain gray maid's dress and her worn-out shoes, Solomon, still disguised as Malachi, raised an eyebrow. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Taking my break," Zora replied simply. She divided the food in half, scooped one portion onto the extra napkin she'd brought, handed it to him. "You should eat your own food," Solomon said. "You look like you haven't had a real meal in weeks." "I'm fine." "You're lying." Zora looked at him sharply. Nobody talked to her like that. Most people didn't talk to her at all. "Excuse me," Solomon shrugged. "I've been on these streets for a while. I know what hunger looks like, and right now it looks like you." Zora was quiet for a moment, then she let out a small laugh. It surprised her. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed. "Fair enough," she admitted. "But I'll survive." "You need this more than me." Something about the way he said it made Zora pause. She studied his face. For a homeless man, he had very clear eyes, sharp, intelligent, like there was a whole universe of thoughts happening behind them. "What's your name?" she asked. "Malachi." "That's a biblical name. It means messenger." Solomon tilted his head. "You know your Bible." "My mama made sure of that." Zora's voice softened. "She used to say names have power. They shape who you become." "What does Zora mean?" Dawn. "My mama said I was her new beginning." Something shifted in Solomon's expression, a warmth that hadn't been there before. "That's beautiful," he said quietly. They sat in comfortable silence after that, eating their small portions of food. The Atlanta heat beat down on them, but neither seemed to mind. When Zora's 30 minutes were up, she stood and brushed off her dress. "Same time tomorrow?" Solomon asked. Zora smiled. It was small and tired, but real. "Same time tomorrow." And that's how it started, y'all. Every single day for the next month, Zora would take her 30-minute break and sit with the man she knew as Malachi. Every single day, she would divide her only meal in half and share it with him, rain or shine, hot or cold, exhausted or barely standing. She never missed a day. One weekend, Solomon noticed she was getting thinner. Her cheekbones were sharper. Her dress hung looser on her frame. The dark circles under her eyes had become permanent residents, but she still showed up, still shared her food, still sat with him like he was worth her time. "You should keep your food today," Solomon said on day 7. "I'm fine." "Zora, Malachi," she gave him a look. "Stop arguing and eat." Solomon shook his head slightly. This woman was something else. He'd spent 5 years doing this. 5 years testing humanity. And in all that time, he'd never met anyone like Zora Carter. Most people who gave to the homeless did it to feel good about themselves. They'd toss $1, take a selfie, and move on with their day. But Zora sat with him, talked to him, treated him like a human being, and she was literally starving herself to do it. Solomon's chest did something strange, a tightening, a warmth. He ignored it. He had a plan. He needed to stick to the plan. 2 weeks in, Zora started telling him about her life. Not everything, not the deep stuff, just little pieces here and there. "I was supposed to be an architect," she said one afternoon. "I was at Spelman studying design. I wanted to build things like my daddy did." "What happened?" Zora's eyes went distant. "Life happened." Solomon didn't push. He understood about pain that was too fresh to touch. "What about you?" Zora asked. "Where's your family?" "Don't have one," Solomon replied, and that part wasn't a lie. "Grew up in foster care, aged out at 18, been on my own ever since." "I'm sorry, B. It taught me things, how to survive, how to read people, how to tell who's real and who's fake." "What do you see when you read me?" Solomon looked at her carefully. This woman who had nothing, who was treated like nothing, who still somehow found it in her heart to feed a stranger. "I see someone who deserves better," he said quietly. Zora's eyes glistened. She looked away quickly, blinking hard. "We should eat," she said, her voice thick. "Food's getting cold." Solomon let the moment pass, but he filed it away in his memory. Someone who deserves better. He was going to make sure she got it. 3 weeks in, Derek called with an update. Solomon was back at his penthouse, freshly showered, standing by his massive windows. The Atlanta skyline glittered before him, but he wasn't seeing it. All he could see was Zora's face. "I got the financial records," Derek said through the phone. "And bro, you're not gonna like this." "Me." The debt Zora's father owed, it was real. $800,000. That's a lot, but it's nowhere near what she's paying off. Solomon's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "The contract Zora signed says she owes $2.7 million. Vivian Montgomery inflated the debt. She added almost $2 million that doesn't exist." Solomon went very still. "Telling me?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "That woman is keeping Zora as a slave for a debt that isn't real." "That's exactly what I'm telling you, and it gets worse." "How could it possibly get worse?" Derek sighed heavily. "James Carter and Gerald Montgomery had a joint business account years ago. I traced the transactions. Vivian has been embezzling from that account since before James died. She's been stealing money and covering it up by keeping Zora too busy and too broken to ever look into her father's finances." Solomon's hand tightened around the phone. His knuckles turned white. "How much?" "Total, about $1.2 million over 10 years. Solomon closed his eyes. Red-hot rage pulsed through his veins. This woman, this cruel, evil woman, had stolen from Zora's father while he was alive. And now she was punishing the daughter for a debt she had created. "There's more," Derek continued. "I talked to some people who used to work for the Montgomerys. The way they treat Zora, Solo, it's bad. She sleeps in a basement. She works 18-hour days. She gets one meal a day. And Vivian keeps adding time to her sentence whenever she feels like it. Adding time. Yeah, breaks a dish, 3 more months, shows up late, another month. The original deal was 3 years. At this rate, Zora will be there for a decade." Solomon opened his eyes. The Atlanta skyline had never looked so cold. "Derek, I want everything, every transaction, every document, every dirty secret that family has." "Already on it, but Solo, What are you gonna do? Solomon thought about Zora. Her tired eyes, her thin frame, the way she still smiled despite everything, the way she shared her only food with a stranger while her own stomach growled. I'm going to destroy them, Solomon said calmly. Completely and totally. They're going to lose everything. Their money, their reputation, their freedom. Derek was quiet for a moment. And Zora? Solomon's expression softened, just slightly. I'm going to give her everything they took. The next day Solomon was back at the gate, same torn clothes, same dirty appearance, same paper cup, but everything had changed. He wasn't just observing anymore. He wasn't just curious. He was planning. And when Zora walked out with her plate of food, her tired smile, her generous heart, Solomon felt something crack open in his chest. He was falling for her. He, Solomon Kane Wright, billionaire bachelor who trusted no one, was falling for a maid who had nothing but kindness. And he had no idea what to do about it. Week 4 started badly. Zora came out for her break, but she wasn't carrying food. Solomon sat up straighter. Something was wrong. He could see it in her body language, the way her shoulders curved inward, the way her steps were slower than usual. She sat down beside him heavily. Her eyes were red. No food today? Solomon asked carefully. Zora shook her head. Mrs. Montgomery canceled my meals for the week, said I broke an expensive vase. Tiffany knocked it over and blamed me. Zora's voice was flat, dead, but it doesn't matter. Nobody believes the help. Solomon's jaw tightened. His hands curled into fists. That's not right, he said. You know that's not right. Right doesn't matter when you have no power. Zora leaned her head back against the wall. I used to believe in fairness, you know. My daddy taught me that if you work hard and treat people well, good things will happen. She laughed bitterly. Now I know the truth. Good things happen to people with money. The rest of us just survive. Solomon wanted to tell her everything right then. Wanted to rip off his disguise, show her who he really was, promise her that everything would be okay. But he couldn't, not yet. If he revealed himself now, she might think everything was fake. The conversations, the connection, all of it. He needed her to know him as Malachi first, to trust him as Malachi, then he could show her the truth. Things won't always be this way, Solomon said quietly. Sometimes life sets you up for something better, you just can't see it yet. Zora turned her head to look at him. Her eyes, those beautiful, exhausted eyes, searched his face. Sound different today, she said. Less like a homeless man, more like someone who knows something I don't. Solomon's heart skipped. Maybe I do, he said carefully. Maybe there are things about me you don't know yet. Zora studied him for a long moment. Then she shook her head slightly. Strange, Malachi, but I like you. You're the only person who talks to me like I'm human anymore. Solomon's chest ached. You are human, Zora. Never let anyone make you forget that. That night, something terrible happened. Zora was cleaning Tiffany's room when she found it, her mother's Bible. It was supposed to be hidden in her basement room, under her pillow. The only thing she had left from her parents. But somehow, Tiffany had found it and destroyed it. The Bible was ripped apart. Pages torn out and scattered across the floor like confetti. The leather cover, worn soft by her mother's hands over decades of prayer, was slashed with scissors, and written across the remaining pages in red marker, "Trash belongs in the trash." Zora's knees gave out. She collapsed on the floor, surrounded by the remains of her mother's most precious possession. The book that Lorraine Carter had held every morning during prayer. The book that still smelled like her perfume, gone, destroyed, desecrated. Zora didn't scream. She didn't cry out, she just sat there. Silent tears streaming down her face, her hands shaking as she gathered the torn pages. This was too much, everything else she could take, the basement, the work, the hunger, the insults. But this broke something inside her. Tiffany found her there an hour later. Oh good, you found it. Tiffany leaned against the doorframe, examining her perfect nails. I've been meaning to throw that thing out for weeks. It was taking up space in your little dungeon. Zora looked up slowly. Her eyes were empty, hollow. That was my mother's. Tiffany shrugged. Well, your mother's dead. She doesn't need it anymore, and honestly, neither do you. It's not like God's listening to someone like you anyway. Something flickered in Zora's empty eyes, a spark. Then it died. I need to finish cleaning, Zora said flatly. Please leave so I can do my job. Tiffany's smile faltered. She'd expected a reaction, tears, begging. Something she could laugh about later with her friends, but this emptiness. This scared her a little, not that she'd ever admit it. Whatever. Tiffany tossed her hair and walked away. Make sure you throw that garbage out properly. When Zora finally went to bed that night, on her cot in her basement surrounded by darkness, she didn't sleep. She held the torn pages of her mother's Bible against her chest and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in 2 years, Zora Carter thought about giving up. What was the point? The debt would never end. Vivian would always find reasons to add more time. Tiffany would always find new ways to hurt her. Gerald would always look away. She was trapped, alone, forgotten. Maybe it would be easier to just stop fighting, stop hopping. Stop waking up every morning expecting something to change. The thought sat heavy in her chest, dark and tempting. But then she thought about Malachi, that strange homeless man who listened to her like her words mattered, who challenged her when she lied about being fine, who looked at her like she was worth something. If she gave up, who would share lunch with him? It was a small thing, a silly thing maybe, but it was enough. Zora closed her eyes and held her mother's torn Bible tighter. "One more day, Mama," she whispered. "I'll try one more day." The next afternoon, Zora walked out to the gate. She still had no food. Her meal restriction wasn't over, but she needed to see Malachi. Needed to sit with someone who didn't make her feel worthless. Solomon was in his usual spot. But when he saw her face, he immediately knew something was very wrong. "What happened?" he asked sharply. Zora sat down beside him. She didn't answer right away. Then, slowly, she pulled out a handful of torn pages from her pocket, held them carefully like they were made of glass. "My mother's Bible," she said quietly. "It was the only thing I had left from my parents. The daughter, Tiffany, she destroyed it." Solomon looked at the torn pages, at Zora's trembling hands, at the tear tracks still visible on her cheeks, and something inside him snapped. He was done waiting, done watching her suffer, done pretending to be powerless while this family tore her apart piece by piece. "Zora." His voice came out different, harder, more authoritative. "I need to tell you something." Zora looked up, surprised by the change in his tone. "What?" Solomon opened his mouth to speak, and that's when a shadow fell over them. Well. Zora's blood went cold. She turned slowly, already knowing who she'd see. Vivian Ashford Montgomery stood 3 feet away, a cruel smile spreading across her face. Her phone was in her hand, camera pointed directly at them. "Little maid and her homeless boyfriend," Vivian said sweetly. "How touching." Zora scrambled to her feet. "Mrs. Montgomery, I can explain." "Explain what?" "That you've been sneaking out here every day for the past month, that you've been giving our food to this vagrant." "It was my food, my portion." "Your portion." Vivian's smile sharpened. "Nothing is yours, girl. You own nothing. You are nothing. Everything you have, the food in your belly, the roof over your head, belongs to me." Zora's hands curled into fists at her sides. For the first time in 2 years, real anger flickered across her face. "I am a human being," Zora said, her voice shaking. "I am not your property." "Oh, but you are." Vivian stepped closer. "You signed a contract. You owe me money. Until that debt is paid, you belong to this household. And I just decided your debt is going to take a little longer to pay off. More years ought to cover the embarrassment of having my maid associate with street trash." Vivian gestured dismissively at Solomon. "Consider this a lesson." More years, on top of the 3 she'd already served. On top of the years, Vivian kept adding. Every time Zora breathed wrong, something in Zora crumbled, her shoulders sagged. The fire in her eyes died. She looked like a puppet whose strings had been cut. "Yes, ma'am," she whispered. Vivian smiled triumphantly. "Good girl, now get back inside. You have work to do." Zora didn't look at Solomon as she turned to leave. She couldn't bear to see pity in his eyes. But Solomon wasn't feeling pity. He was feeling rage. The kind of cold, calculating rage that had built him an empire. The kind that didn't explode, it planned. It waited. It struck when the enemy least expected it. Vivian Montgomery had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She thought she was dealing with a homeless man and a powerless maid. She had no idea she'd just declared war on a billionaire. Zora walked through the gate, her head down, her spirit crushed. She didn't look back. Behind her, Solomon pulled out his phone. His expression was ice cold. "Derek," he said when the line connected, "move up the timeline. I want everything ready by the end of the week." "Everything solo, that's... I don't care what it takes. I want their bank accounts frozen. I want their dirty laundry exposed. I want Vivian Montgomery to lose everything she's ever cared about." Derek was silent for a moment. "What happened?" Solomon watched the gate close behind Zora. The last glimpse he caught was her small figure walking toward the mansion, shoulders bent under invisible weight. She broke her, Solomon said quietly. That woman broke her, and now I'm going to return the favor. Zora, Solomon's jaw tightened. It's time she knew the truth about everything. He ended the call, then Solomon Kane Wright, dressed in torn clothes and sitting on dirty concrete, looked up at the Montgomery mansion. His eyes were cold, calculating, dangerous. You have no idea what's coming, he whispered. But you're about to find out. Y'all, the storm is coming. Drop a comment below and tell me. How do you think Zora will react when she finds out Malachi is actually a billionaire? Will she be grateful, or will she feel betrayed? Let me know what you think. Now let's continue the story. 3 days passed after Vivian's confrontation at the gate, 3 days of silence. Zora hadn't come outside once. No lunch breaks, no visits to the gate. Nothing. Solomon sat in his usual spot every single day, waiting, watching. His disguise was perfect as always, torn clothes, dirty appearance, paper cup beside him. But inside he was burning. Derek called him every few hours with updates. The forensic accountants finished their report, Derek said on day 2. It's worse than we thought. Vivian didn't just inflate Zora's debt. She's been running a whole scheme. Fake invoices, phantom expenses. She's been bleeding Gerald's accounts dry for years. Gerald, no? Hard to say. He's either complicit or completely oblivious. My gut says oblivious. The man seems terrified of his own shadow. Solomon filed that information away. Gerald Montgomery might be useful later. What about the contract Zora signed? Completely illegal. A first-year law student could tear it apart. Zora was coerced. She was grieving. She had no legal representation. The terms are unconscionable. Any judge in Georgia would void it immediately. What else? Got media contacts ready to go. 3 major outlets are very interested in a story about a wealthy Atlanta family keeping a young woman as an indentured servant. 1 phone call and Vivian's face will be everywhere. Solomon nodded slowly, even though Derek couldn't see him. Hold off on the media for now. I want to do this right. Zora needs to know the truth first. She deserves to hear it from me, not from a news anchor. Understood, but solo. It's been 3 days. How are you going to tell her if she won't come outside? Solomon looked at the Montgomery mansion. Somewhere behind those walls, Zora was suffering, probably locked in her basement room, probably being worked even harder than before. Then I'll go to her, Solomon said quietly. Go to her? How? You can't exactly walk up to the front door looking like that. But Solomon Wright can. Derek was quiet for a moment, then he laughed softly. Oh man, this is going to be good. The next morning, Vivian Montgomery was having breakfast when the doorbell rang. She frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her calendar was clear until the charity luncheon at noon. Zora, Vivian called out. Get the door. A moment later, Zora appeared from the kitchen. She moved slowly, like every step cost her energy she didn't have. Her face was hollow, empty. The spark that used to live in her eyes was completely gone. Yes, ma'am, she said quietly. Zora walked to the front door and opened it, and her heart stopped. Standing on the doorstep was a man she had never seen before, tall. Broad shoulders, deep dark skin like polished onyx, clean-shaven head, strong jaw, expensive suit that probably cost more than a car. But his eyes, those eyes dark and intense, piercing, like they could see straight through to her soul. She knew those eyes. May I help you? Zora asked, her voice confused. The man smiled. It was small, almost sad. Hello, Zora, he said. Zora blinked. Do I know you? You do. You just don't recognize me. Before Zora could respond, Vivian's sharp voice cut through the air. Who is it, girl? Don't just stand there with the door open. Vivian appeared behind Zora, ready to dismiss whoever was wasting her time. But when she saw the man standing there, her entire demeanor changed. Her eyes went wide. Her face paled slightly. Then she plastered on her most charming smile. Mr. Wright, Vivian exclaimed. What an unexpected honor. Please come in. Zora frowned. Mr. Wright. Why did that name sound familiar? Solomon stepped inside, his eyes never leaving Zora's face. Thank you, Mrs. Montgomery. I hope I'm not interrupting. At all. Gerald, come here immediately. Gerald came rushing from his study, looking confused and slightly alarmed. When he saw Solomon, his confusion deepened. Solomon Wright. Gerald extended his hand. The Solomon Wright, from Wright Development? The same. Solomon shook his hand firmly. I apologize for dropping by unannounced, but I have some business to discuss. Urgent business. Zora stood frozen by the door. Her mind was racing. Solomon Wright. Wright Development Corporation. She'd read about him in magazines, seen his face on billboards around Atlanta, one of the youngest black billionaires in the country. But why did his eyes look so familiar? Zora, don't just stand there like a statue, Vivian snapped. Go make coffee for our guest, the good coffee, the imported kind. Actually, Solomon said smoothly, I'd prefer if Zora stayed. What I have to say concerns her directly. Vivian's smile flickered. I'm sorry, you heard me. Solomon's voice was pleasant, but there was steel underneath. This conversation involves Miss Carter. She should be present. Gerald and Vivian exchanged confused looks. I don't understand, Gerald said slowly. How do you know How do you know Zora? Solomon smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator who had cornered its prey. Why don't we all sit down, he suggested. This might take a while. They gathered in the living room. Vivian and Gerald sat on one sofa, looking increasingly nervous. Zora stood awkwardly near the door, unsure if she was allowed to sit. Sit down, Zora, Solomon said gently. Please. Zora hesitated, then sat on the edge of a chair. Her hands were shaking slightly. Something about this whole situation felt strange. Important, like the ground beneath her was about to shift. Solomon remained standing. He looked around the room slowly, taking in the expensive furniture, the artwork, the signs of wealth everywhere. Then he looked at Zora, at her hollow cheeks, her tired eyes, her worn gray dress. The contrast made his blood boil. I'm going to tell you a story, Solomon began. It's about a young woman named Zora Carter. Her parents died 2 years ago. They left behind a debt, $800,000. Vivian stiffened. I don't see how this is any of your. I'm not finished. Solomon's voice was quiet but deadly. This young woman was approached by a family friend, a woman who offered to pay off the debt. In exchange, Zora would work as household help for 3 years. Gerald's face was turning pale. Sounds reasonable, doesn't it? Solomon continued. 3 years of work to clear $800,000. Hard but fair. He paused, his eyes locked onto Vivian's. Except that's not what happened. Is it, Mrs. Montgomery? Vivian's smile was frozen on her face. I don't know what you're talking about. Then let me refresh your memory. Solomon pulled out his phone. The contract Zora signed states that she owes $2.7 million. That's almost $2 million more than her father actually owed. Zora's breath caught. What? Oh, it gets better. Solomon's voice was ice cold now. I had forensic accountants examine the records. Turns out Vivian Montgomery has been embezzling from the joint account she shared with James Carter for over 10 years. $1.2 million. Stolen. Gerald's face went white as paper. Vivian, is this true? Vivian said nothing. Her smile was gone now. Her eyes were darting around like a trapped animal. Debt Zora has been killing herself to pay off. Solomon stepped closer. Most of it doesn't exist. Vivian created fake invoices, phantom expenses. She inflated the numbers to keep Zora trapped here indefinitely. That's a lie, Vivian finally spoke, her voice high and sharp. This is slander. I'll sue you for everything you have. Will you? Solomon pulled out a folder from his jacket. Because I have bank records, transaction histories. Signed documents in your handwriting. Everything is documented, Mrs. Montgomery, everything. He dropped the folder on the coffee table. Papers spilled out, numbers, dates, evidence of years of theft and manipulation. Gerald picked up one of the papers with trembling hands. His eyes scanned the page. Then he looked at his wife with something Zora had never seen before, disgust. You told me you were helping her, Gerald whispered. You told me this was charity. You said James would have wanted this. Gerald, darling, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. Gerald's voice cracked. I let you turn my best friend's daughter into a slave. I watched her suffer for 2 years. I told myself it was temporary, that we were helping her. He looked at Zora. Tears were streaming down his face. Oh God, Zora, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Zora didn't respond. She couldn't. Her mind was still trying to process everything. The debt was fake. The contract was illegal. She'd been enslaved for 2 years over money that didn't exist. Zora finally managed to whisper. How do you know all this? Solomon turned to face her. His expression softened. The ice in his eyes melted into something warm, something tender. Because I've been watching, Zora. For the past month, I've been right here, seeing everything, learning everything. Zora shook her head slowly. I don't understand. How could you be watching? I've never seen you before today. Solomon took a deep breath. Yes, you have. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. He held it up for her to see. It was a paper cup, worn and creased. The same paper cup that had sat beside him on the concrete every single day. Zora's eyes went wide. Malachi, she breathed. Solomon nodded slowly. That's not my real name. My name is Solomon Kane Wright, and for the past month I've been sitting outside that gate pretending to be homeless. Zora stood up abruptly. Her chair scraped against the floor. You lied to me. I didn't mean to. I told you everything. I shared my food with you. I thought. Her voice broke. I thought you understood what it was like to have nothing. Zora, please. I gave you my only food. Zora's voice rose. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I went hungry so you could eat. And you're a billionaire. She was shaking now, her whole body trembling with shock and anger and hurt. Solomon stepped toward her, his hands raised. I know how this looks. I know you feel deceived. But I need you to understand why I did it. So you could laugh at the poor maid. So you could write a story about how generous you are. No, Solomon's voice was firm. So I could find someone real. Stared at him, tears streaming down her face. Been doing this for 5 years, Solomon continued quietly. Pretending to be homeless, watching how people treat those with nothing. In 5 years, I've met hundreds of people. Most of them walked right past me. Some threw coins without making eye contact. A few called the police. He paused. But you sat down beside me. You shared your only meal. You talked to me like I was a human being. You were starving, Zora, literally starving, and you still gave me half your food. His voice cracked slightly. You know how rare that is. Do you know how long I've been searching for someone with a heart like yours? Zora's anger wavered. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability, but she was still hurt, still confused, still overwhelmed by everything she just learned. I need to get out of here, she said shakily. I need air. I can't breathe. She turned and walked toward the door. Zora, wait, but she was already gone. The front door slammed behind her. Solomon stood frozen, his heart aching in his chest. Vivian let out a bitter laugh. Well, that went well. Your little rescue mission backfired, didn't it? Solomon turned to look at her. His expression was no longer tender. It was pure ice. You think this is over, he said softly. Mrs. Montgomery, this is just the beginning. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Derek, release everything now. Y'all, I need to pause here for just a second. If you're feeling all the emotions right now, the anger, the shock, the heartbreak, then you understand what Zora is going through. This story is about to reach its climax. Everything is going to change. Now let's keep going. Within 24 hours, Vivian Montgomery's world collapsed. It started with the bank accounts. Every single account connected to the Montgomery family was frozen pending investigation. Credit cards declined. Wire transfers blocked. The lifestyle Vivian had built over decades crumbled in a single morning. Then came the media. Solomon had connections at every major news outlet in Atlanta. By noon, the story was everywhere. Local news, national news, social media was on fire. Atlanta socialite accused of keeping young woman as indentured servant. Embezzlement scandal rocks prominent Buckhead family. Orphan enslaved over fake debt for 2 years. Vivian's phone rang nonstop with calls from her so-called friends. But they weren't calling to support her. They were calling to distance themselves, to make sure everyone knew they had nothing to do with this scandal. The charity board she sat on sent letters of immediate dismissal. The country club revoked her membership. The women who used to laugh at her jokes and praise her fashion sense now whispered behind her back. Some of them gave interviews to reporters, talking about how they always knew something was wrong with Vivian. By evening, police arrived at the Montgomery estate. Zora wasn't there. She'd left that morning and hadn't come back, but the officers didn't need her yet. They had enough evidence to proceed. Vivian Ashford Montgomery was arrested on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and coercion. She was led out of her mansion in handcuffs, her perfectly styled hair falling out of place for the first time in decades. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Neighbors watched from behind curtains. The woman who had made Zora feel worthless for 2 years was finally getting exactly what she deserved. Meanwhile, Zora sat on a bench in Piedmont Park. She'd been there for hours, watching the sunset, watching the sky turn orange and pink and purple, watching families walk by with their children, couples holding hands, people living normal lives, lives she used to dream about. Her phone buzzed. A text from Carmen. Girl, Turn on the news right now. You're not going to believe this. Zora didn't turn on the news. She didn't need to. She could already feel that something had shifted in the world. Another text came through. Zora, it's Derek Huang, Solomon's assistant. He asked me to give you space, but also to let you know, whatever you need, it's yours. A place to stay, money, legal help, anything. No strings attached. Here's my number if you want to talk. Zora stared at the message for a long time, then her phone rang. A number she didn't recognize. Against her better judgment, she answered. It's Gerald. Zora said nothing. No, you have no reason to listen to me, Gerald continued. His voice was thick, like he'd been crying. I know I failed you. I failed your father. I was a coward. I watched my wife hurt you for 2 years and I did nothing. Are you calling? Because I need you to know the truth. The whole truth. Gerald took a shaky breath. Your father never owed $2.7 million. The real debt was $800,000. And most of that was money Vivian stole from him in the first place. Zora closed her eyes. Solomon already told me. There's more. I found documents in my study. Your father was about to discover what Vivian was doing. He was going to confront her the week he died. Gerald's voice broke. I don't know if, I can't prove anything, but the timing. Zora's blood went cold. What are you saying? Saying I don't know what my wife is capable of anymore. I'm saying I've been blind and stupid and afraid. And I'm saying I'm sorry for everything. He was crying now. Zora could hear it through the phone. I turned over all the evidence to Mr. Wright and the police. Every document, every file, everything I could find. It won't undo what's been done, but maybe it's a start. Zora was quiet for a long moment. My father trusted you, she finally said. He called you his brother. I know. You let his daughter be treated like trash in your own house. I know. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Mr. Montgomery. Gerald's crying intensified. I understand. I wouldn't forgive me either. Zora felt tears on her own cheeks, but also something else, something lighter, like a weight beginning to lift. But I'm going to try, she said quietly. Because my mama taught me that holding onto anger only poisons your own heart, so I'm going to try. Gerald sobbed openly now. Thank you, Zora. I don't deserve it, but thank you. Zora ended the call. She sat there as darkness fell over the park. The streetlights came on one by one. The temperature dropped. Still, she didn't move until she heard footsteps approaching. She knew who it was before she looked up. She could feel him, his presence. His energy. Solomon sat down on the bench beside her, not too close, giving her space. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Solomon said, I'm sorry. What? For lying, for making you feel deceived. For not telling you the truth sooner. Zora turned to look at him. In the soft glow of the streetlights, he looked different, not like Malachi the homeless man. Not quite like the powerful billionaire she'd seen that morning, something in between, something real. Why did you do it? She asked. The homeless disguise, all of it. Why? Solomon was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. I grew up in foster care, he said finally. Never knew my father. My mother died when I was 6. I spent 12 years bouncing from home to home, some good, most not. Zora listened silently. When I aged out at 18, I had nothing. Literally nothing, just the clothes on my back and a determination to never feel powerless again. Solomon's jaw tightened. I worked construction during the day, studied at night, saved every penny, started buying properties, built a company, made more money than I ever dreamed possible. That's incredible. Solomon laughed bitterly. The money came with a price. Suddenly everyone wanted to be my friend. Women who wouldn't look at me twice before were throwing themselves at me. Business partners, investors, employees, everyone wanted something. He paused. I got engaged once. Her name was Monica, beautiful, charming, perfect in every way. I thought I'd finally found someone who saw in me, not my bank account. What happened? She was feeding information to my rival, planning to divorce me after 1 year and take half my assets. When I found out. Solomon shook his head. I realized I couldn't trust anyone, not really, not when they knew who I was. So you started pretending to be homeless. My therapist's idea, actually. She said I needed to reconnect with humility, remember what it felt like to be invisible. Solomon looked at Zora. So twice a year I disappear, put on torn clothes, sit on sidewalks, watch how people treat those with nothing. In 5 years, I found exactly what I expected. Cruelty. Indifference, people who only care about what you can give them. His voice softened. Until you, Zora's heart skipped. You sat down beside me on dirty concrete, Solomon continued. You shared your only food, you talked to me like I mattered, you were starving, Zora, literally wasting away, and you still gave me half your meal. He turned to face her fully, his dark eyes intense. Do you understand what that means? In a world full of people who take and take and take, you gave. When you had nothing, you still found something to share. Zora felt tears building again. I knew what it felt like to be invisible. I couldn't walk past you. That's exactly my point. Solomon reached out slowly and took her hand. His touch was gentle, warm. Your kindness isn't an accident, it's who you are. Even when life beats you down, even when people treat you like nothing, you still choose to be good. A tear slid down Zora's cheek. Then another. I don't know who I am anymore, she whispered. For 2 years I've been nothing but a maid, a servant, someone who scrubs floors and stays silent. I forgot what it felt like to be Zora Carter. Then let me remind you. Solomon squeezed her hand. You're the daughter of James and Lorraine Carter, who loved you enough to name you Dawn, because you were their new beginning. You're a brilliant architecture student who was going to design buildings that would make your father proud. You're a loyal friend who Carmen would do anything for. You're a survivor who endured 2 years of abuse and never let it make you cruel. He lifted her chin gently, making her meet his eyes. The woman I've been searching for my entire life. And if you let me, I'd like to spend however long it takes proving that you deserve everything good this world has to offer. Zora stared at him. This man who had been a stranger on the concrete, who had listened to her without judgment, who had just dismantled an empire to set her free. I don't want your money, she said firmly. I don't want charity. I don't want to be another person who takes from you. Solomon smiled. Really smiled. The first genuine smile she'd ever seen on his face. I know. That's exactly why I'm falling for you. 6 months later, things were different, very different. Zora Carter stood in the lobby of a gleaming office building in downtown Atlanta. The sign above the reception desk read, Carter & Sons Construction, but everything else was new. The building, the equipment, the team of capable employees who actually knew what they were doing, the systems and processes that kept everything running smoothly. Solomon had made it all happen, not by giving Zora handouts, but by investing in her father's company as a legitimate business partner, by hiring experts to teach Zora everything she needed to know about running a construction business, by standing beside her as she rebuilt her father's legacy from the ground up. Zora had finished her architecture degree. Online classes, accelerated timeline. She'd graduated with honors last month. Her diploma hung on the wall of her new office, the same office her father used to occupy. Carmen visited every weekend now. She'd been promoted to head nurse at Grady Memorial and was dadding a pediatric surgeon named Marcus who made her laugh like a teenager. Mira, I still can't believe this is real, Carmen said during one of her visits, looking around at the gleaming new office. 6 months ago you were sleeping in a basement. Now look at you. CEO Zora Carter. Co-CEO, Zora corrected. I'm still learning. Derek's team handles a lot of the day-to-day operations. Speaking of Derek's team, Carmen raised an eyebrow. How's the billionaire boyfriend? Zora felt her cheeks warm. He's not my boyfriend, Hermana, please. That man looks at you like you hung the moon. He just invested $20 million in your company. You two have dinner together every single night. If he's not your boyfriend, what is he? Zora smiled softly. He's Solomon. Carmen rolled her eyes dramatically. You're hopeless, absolutely hopeless. As for the Montgomerys, Vivian's trial had been front-page news for weeks. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Bank records, forged documents, testimony from former employees, Gerald's full cooperation with prosecutors. She was convicted on all charges. 15 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole for at least 10. The last time Zora saw Vivian was at the sentencing hearing. The woman who had once stood over her like a queen, making her feel small and worthless, was now wearing an orange jumpsuit. Her hair was limp, her face was bare, her eyes were hollow. When she was led away in handcuffs, Vivian had looked at Zora one last time. There was no remorse in her eyes, only hatred. Zora felt nothing, not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity, just nothing. Vivian Montgomery had taken 2 years of her life, but she wouldn't take a single day more. Not even in Zora's memories. Gerald had sold the mansion and donated most of the money to a foundation supporting orphaned youth. He'd moved to a small apartment in Midtown. He volunteered at homeless shelters 3 times a week. He and Zora met for coffee once a month. The conversations were awkward at first, painful, full of apologies that could never quite heal the wounds, but slowly, carefully, they were building something new. Not the relationship Gerald had with her father, something different. Something earned. Tiffany had been forced to get a job for the first time in her life. She worked at a boutique in Lenox Square, minimum wage plus commission. It was humbling in a way she'd never experienced. 6 months after her mother's conviction, Tiffany sent Zora a letter. It was short, awkward, full of misspellings and grammatical errors, but the last line stood out. "I destroyed your mother's Bible. That was wrong. I'm sorry. I know sorry doesn't fix it, but I'm trying to be better. I don't know if I know how yet, but I'm trying." Zora didn't respond to the letter. She wasn't ready, but she didn't throw it away either. On a warm Saturday evening in October, Solomon asked Zora to meet him at Piedmont Park, the same park where she'd sat alone after learning the truth. The same park where he'd found her on that bench and they'd talked until the stars came out. Zora arrived at sunset, wearing a simple white dress that Carmen had insisted she buy. Her natural hair was loose around her shoulders, the way her mother used to wear hers. Solomon was waiting by the lake. He was wearing a dark suit, which was unusual. He usually dressed casually when they were together. Zora's heart started beating faster. "Why so fancy?" she asked, approaching him. "Are we going somewhere special?" Solomon smiled. That warm, tender smile that he only showed her. "We're already somewhere special." He took her hands in his. His palms were warm, steady, strong. "Elise Carter, 8 months ago you gave me half a peanut butter sandwich while I sat on dirty concrete pretending to be homeless." Zora laughed. "It was rice and beans, actually." "Details." Solomon's eyes twinkled. "The point is you had nothing, less than nothing. You were starving, exhausted, beaten down by life in every possible way." His expression grew serious. "And still you shared what little you had with a stranger. You sat with me, talked to me, treated me like a human being when nobody else would even make eye contact." He released one of her hands and reached into his jacket pocket. "Spent my whole life looking for something real, something true, something that money can't buy and lies can't fake." He pulled out a small velvet box. Zora's breath caught. "I found it in you." Solomon's voice was thick with emotion. "Not because of what you can give me, not because of what I can give you, but because of who you are, your kindness, your strength, your heart." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple and elegant. A single diamond that caught the sunset light and scattered it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. "Zora Carter, will you marry me?" Zora's vision blurred with tears. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The pain, the loss, the years of suffering that had nearly broken her, but also the kindness she'd chosen to hold onto, the meal she'd shared with a stranger, the heart she'd refused to let go hard. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, yes, yes, yes." Solomon's face broke into the biggest smile she'd ever seen. He slipped the ring onto her finger with trembling hands. Then he pulled her close and kissed her, soft, sweet, full of promise. Around them, people in the park started clapping, strangers who had been watching, families, couples, dog walkers, everyone cheering for a love story they knew nothing about. But that was okay, Zora and Solomon knew. And that was all that mattered. The wedding was held 4 months later. It was everything Zora had never dared to dream of. A beautiful venue in Buckhead, ironically, just a few miles from the mansion where she'd been enslaved. 500 guests, crystal chandeliers, fresh flowers everywhere. But it wasn't the fancy decorations that made Zora's heart full. It was the people. Carmen stood beside her as maid of honor, crying happy tears before the ceremony even started. Derek stood beside Solomon as best man, his husband Brandon seated in the front row with their twin daughters. Gerald sat in the back, quietly weeping, grateful just to be included. And surrounding them all were people who genuinely cared. Employees from both companies, friends Zora had reconnected with, new relationships built on honesty and respect. When Zora walked down the aisle, her natural hair crowned with white flowers, her mother's repaired Bible carried alongside her bouquet, everyone stood. Solomon watched her approach with tears in his eyes. This man who had built an empire. This man who trusted no one. This man who had pretended to be homeless just to find something real. He had found it in her. and she had found it in him. When Zora reached the altar, she leaned close and whispered, "6 months ago, I gave you half my sandwich on a park bench. I thought you were starving." Solomon laughed softly, tears streaming down his face. "I was starving, just not for food." The ceremony was beautiful. The vows were personal and tear-filled. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the room erupted in applause, but the moment that stayed with Zora forever came later. At the reception, Solomon took the microphone for his speech. 11 months ago, I was sitting on concrete outside a mansion in Buckhead. I was dirty. I looked homeless. Most people walked right past me without a second glance. Room was silent, hanging on every word. But then a young woman came out carrying trash bags. She saw me sitting there, and instead of ignoring me like everyone else, she went back inside. Solomon's voice cracked. She came back with her only meal for the day, her only food. And she gave it to me without asking for anything in return. He looked at Zora, his eyes shining. That moment changed my life, because I realized that kindness still exists, that goodness is still real, that somewhere in this world there are people who give even when they have nothing. He raised his glass. To my wife, Zora Carter Wright, the woman who taught a billionaire the true meaning of wealth, I love you, forever. Room erupted in cheers. Glasses clinked. Music started playing. And Zora Carter Wright, formerly a maid sleeping in a basement, now co-owner of a thriving construction company, wife of one of Atlanta's most successful businessmen, danced in her husband's arms until her feet hurt. She had never been happier. 5 years later, the story came full circle. Zora was tucking her daughter into bed. Little Lorraine James Wright, named after both grandparents she would never meet, was 4 years old with her father's intense eyes and her mother's kind heart. "Tell me the story again, Mama," Lorraine said sleepily. "The one about the princess and the beggar." Zora smiled and sat on the edge of the bed. "Once upon a time there was a girl who lost everything, her home, her family, her hope. She was forced to work for cruel people who treated her like she was worthless." "That's sad," Lorraine said. "It was, very sad, but the girl never let her heart go hard. Even when she was hungry, she still shared her food. Even when she was tired, she still showed kindness. Even when people treated her like nothing, she still treated others like they mattered." Then she met the beggar. And then she met a man she thought was a beggar. He sat outside her gate every day looking tired and hungry, so she brought him food, her only food, because she knew what it felt like to have nothing. He wasn't really a beggar. No, baby, he wasn't. He was actually a prince in disguise. He was looking for someone real, someone kind. Someone whose heart was made of gold even when she had nothing else. Lorraine's eyes were getting heavy. And he found her. And together they built a kingdom, not a kingdom of money or power, a kingdom of love and kindness and second chances. They lived happily ever after. Zora leaned down and kissed her daughter's forehead. Happily ever after, forever and always. Lorraine's eyes closed, her breathing slowed. Within moments she was asleep. Zora stood quietly and walked to the door. Solomon was leaning against the frame, watching with soft eyes. "Kingdom of love and kindness," he whispered, smiling. "That's new. I'm editing as I go." Zora took his hand. "It's a work in progress." They walked down the hallway of their home together. Through the window, the Atlanta skyline glittered in the distance. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Zora asked quietly. "If I hadn't given you that food? If you hadn't been sitting at that exact gate on that exact day?" Solomon squeezed her hand. "Every single day," he said. "And every single day I thank God for peanut butter sandwiches. It was rice and beans. Whatever it was, it brought me you. So it was the most important meal of my life." Zora laughed and leaned into him. This man who had been a stranger on the concrete, who had become her friend, her champion, her husband, her forever. "Love you, Solomon Wright." "I love you too, Zora Wright, more than all the billions in the world." So what can we learn from Zora's story? 3 things. First, your kindness is never wasted. Zora had nothing. She was starving, beaten down, treated like trash by people who should have helped her. But she still chose to share what little she had with someone she thought had even less. She didn't know Solomon was a billionaire. She didn't do it for reward. She did it because that's who she is, and that kindness, it changed everything. Y'all, you never know who's watching. You never know how a small act of generosity might come back to you. Keep being kind even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Second, your circumstances don't define your worth. Zora was sleeping in a basement, wearing hand-me-down clothes, eating one meal a day. By the world's standards, she was nothing, but she was still worthy of love, still worthy of respect, still worthy of a fairy tale ending. Your bank account doesn't determine your value. Your job title doesn't determine your value. Your address, your clothes, your circumstances, none of that determines who you are. You are worthy, right now, exactly as you are. Third, the people who mistreat you will always face consequences. Vivian Montgomery spent years building an empire of cruelty. She thought she was untouchable. She thought money and status made her powerful, but in the end, the truth came out. It always does, so if you're going through a season where people treat you badly, hold on. Your story isn't over. Justice might be delayed, but it's never denied. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And make sure you're subscribed because we've got stories every week that'll make you laugh, cry, and believe in the power of kindness again. Until next time, stay blessed, stay kind, and remember, the right people see your heart, not your circumstances. Your breakthrough might be closer than you think.